Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into a case that literally shattered a community, and honestly, it remains one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in American history. I want you to picture Washington, D.C., but, picture it back in 1971. The city was going through some rapid changes, sure, but in a lot of these neighborhoods, there was still this really deep sense of security. Kids could just walk down to the local corner store and head back home without anyone batting an eye. It was just a totally different era. But that peaceful illusion, it was abruptly destroyed when young girls began to disappear. We're going to look closely at the facts, the evidence, and the timeline to understand exactly what went wrong and why, well over 50 years later, this case absolutely still haunts investigators.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline. It all started on April 25, 1971. A 13-year-old girl named Denise Spinks went out in D.C. on a totally routine errand, but she never made it back. 6 days later, her body was tragically found near the Suitland Parkway. Now, when investigators examined the scene, they figured out she had been assaulted and strangled, but they also found this very specific, kind of unusual piece of evidence on her clothing, these green synthetic fibers. Now, at this early stage, police really had no reason to think a serial killer was operating in their city. If you look at it from their perspective at the time, Carol's murder, while horrific, it just seemed like an isolated tragedy. But as you'll see, it was actually the start of something much, much darker.
Part 1. The First Disappearances. The summer of 1971. The rapid succession of these crimes was frankly terrifying. Just weeks after Carol Spinks, a 16-year-old girl named Darlenia Denise Johnson disappears on July 8th. She was just heading to her summer job. 11 days later, they find her body. Suddenly, investigators realize they simply can't ignore the similarities here. Both young black girls, both vanished from D.C., and both suffered the exact same tragic fate. But before the police can even catch their breath or piece together answers for Darlenia and Carol, the timeline strikes again. Just weeks later, July 27th, Brenda Faye Crockett goes missing. I want to slow down right here for a second, because the details of Brenda's disappearance are just incredibly harrowing. Brenda was the youngest victim. She was only 10 years old. She went out on an ordinary errand and just vanished. But then this terrifying development happened. According to investigators, Brenda was actually forced by her captor to call her family while she was missing. Imagine that. Her family had to endure the absolute nightmare of hearing her voice on the phone, knowing she was in terrible danger, but being completely powerless to save her. And the very next day, Brenda's body was discovered. Just like the others, she had been strangled.
Part 2. A terrifying pattern emerges. Investigators realize what they're up against.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact modus operandi connecting these murders. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. The killer was specifically targeting young black females, anyone from young children to teenagers. They were all being abducted right from within Washington, D.C. The cause of death? Consistently strangulation. And the bodies were being dumped in very specific locations, always near major roads and freeways in D.C. and nearby Prince George's County. Oh, and crucially, there was that forensic overlap. Those unusual green synthetic fibers kept showing up on the victim's clothing. So, of course, once a pattern this clear and this terrifying emerges, the media steps in. They actually coined the moniker the Freeway Phantom. It was a direct reference to the killer's habit of leaving the victims' bodies near those major transportation routes. It's a chilling name, right? It captured the public's fear perfectly. But as is usually the case in these investigations, having a catchy nickname in the local papers brought the police absolutely no closer to identifying the suspect, making an arrest, or figuring out why these specific girls were being chosen.
And the terror didn't end with the summer. It bled right into the fall of 1971. On October 1st, 12-year-old Nenomoshia Yates went to a nearby Safeway and she never returned. Her body was found later that exact same night near Pennsylvania Avenue. Once again, she had been strangled, and yep, those telltale green synthetic fibers were present on her clothing. At this point, the reality of an active serial killer in D.C. was completely undeniable. Which brings us to November 15th and the critical fifth case, the disappearance of 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard.
Part 3. The killer's chilling message.
When Brenda Woodard's body was discovered, investigators found a handwritten note right in her clothing. The message was written as though the killer was speaking directly to the investigators themselves. But here's the truly extraordinary and terrifying detail about this. When the FBI analyzed this note, they determined that Brenda had written it herself. Investigators firmly believe it was dictated to her by her captor right before she was murdered. It raises this incredibly haunting possibility that she might have actually known or seen something about the identity of the person who took her life. The note was signed with these exact words, Freeway Phantom. By using the exact name created by the media, the killer was actively taunting the police.
This signature proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the killer was watching the investigation closely, reading the newspapers, and really enjoying the notoriety. Plus, the note actually claimed there were other victims out there.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the complex psychological puzzle it presents. You really have to ask yourself, why do this? I mean, any piece of physical evidence, especially a handwritten note handled by both the victim and the killer, is an incredibly dangerous clue to leave behind. Was it just pure arrogance? Did he actually believe he was simply smarter than the police? Was it a form of psychological manipulation to just instill deeper terror in the community? Or was it a deliberate misdirection? A calculated move to send investigators chasing the wrong leads? To this day, nobody knows for sure.
10. That's the number of months of pure silence that followed Brenda Woodard's murder and that chilling note. For nearly a year, the killings just completely stopped. No new confirmed victims. And during this really tense waiting period, investigators were desperately chasing down every single lead. They looked to people already tied up in local criminal networks. They considered theories that the killer had felt the heat of the investigation and just bolted from the region entirely. The whole city was basically holding its breath.
And then, that silence was violently shattered. In September 1972, 17-year-old Diane Denise Williams disappeared. She had spent the evening with her boyfriend, who had walked her toward a bus stop. She was supposed to just go home, but the next morning, her body was discovered along Interstate 295. She had been strangled. The familiar, devastating pattern was back. A young black female, abducted and dumped near a major roadway. Diane Williams became the sixth known victim connected to the Freeway Phantom.
Part 4. A compromised investigation.
Let's move to Utah and see how this builds on the challenges detectives were facing. To really understand why this wasn't solved, we have to look at it through the lens of the 1970s. Solving a case like this back then was incredibly difficult because, well, forensic technology was practically primitive compared to today's standards. Think about it. In a modern investigation, police rely heavily on advanced DNA tracking, massive genetic databases, and the fact that there are digital surveillance cameras on almost every street corner. The 1971 investigators, they had none of that. They were relying on basic fiber analysis, blood typing, and eyewitness testimony. But honestly, a lack of technology wasn't even their biggest hurdle.
So the crucial point is this absolute gut punch of a fact. As the years went by and new generations of detectives tried to reconstruct this notorious case with modern eyes, they reportedly discovered that important original police records and physical evidence had actually been lost or destroyed. Just imagine trying to solve a 50-year-old puzzle only to find someone threw away half the pieces. It's wild. Modern investigators have literally been forced to rebuild the case relying heavily on old FBI records, newspaper archives, surviving partial police files, and past interviews.
Part 5. The mystery remains unsolved.
It's so easy to look at an old case like this with its missing files and old dates and just see it purely as some analytical puzzle. But we have to remember, these were 6 human beings: Carol, Darlenia, Brenda Crockett, Nenomoshia, Brenda Woodard, Diane. They were young girls and teenagers, ranging from just 10 to 18 years old. They had families who loved them, friends who missed them, and entirely unwritten futures that were just stolen from them. Over the decades, sure, many suspects and persons of interest have been looked at. There have been endless rumors and generational investigations, but nobody has ever been officially convicted for these 6 murders. And the passage of time, it doesn't erase the immense loss their families suffered, just waiting for daughters who never came home.
So, we are left with the exact same question we started with. Who was the Freeway Phantom? The neighborhoods and roads of Washington, D.C. have changed a lot, but the shadow of this case remains. Somewhere in the history of this city, there may still be a person who knows exactly what happened. It might be someone who remembers a strange conversation, an out-of-place vehicle, or a suspicious person from 1971. A detail that seemed totally meaningless decades ago could literally be the exact piece of evidence needed today. The killer may have vanished into the shadows, but the case never did. Remember, sometimes one forgotten detail is all it takes to unlock a decades-old mystery. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and never underestimate the power of the smallest clue.